and I shall hand over to Rohini. So Rohini, would you like to introduce yourself? And
yeah, let me just pop my light on here.
Talk about it. You've got screen share if you'd like it.
Awesome. So yeah, hey everyone, I'm Rohini. I run a business called Livewire Media, where we do corporate videography and video marketing. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you guys. So last year, 2 years ago, at the beginning of lockdown, I set up my own podcast called Livewire TV. So we've been going very strongly ever since we started up. We get on average about 200 to 500 plus views to a worldwide audience. In this particular presentation, I'm going to be talking to you guys about how to set up podcasts, how to monetize it, and how to use it to massively grow your brand, just like I have. So a quick show of hands before we get started. Who here listens to podcasts? Who here is thinking about setting up your own podcast? Cool, quite a few of you then. So why are podcasts really, really beneficial for your brand? Well, first of all, it builds up your audience massively, because not everyone engages in social media, not everybody engages in videos. Some people just like to communicate through audio, so it's a really convenient way to reach people whilst they're driving, whilst they're on their commute, etc. And ultimately, when you do a podcast, it raises your brand profile and your credibility, because people think, wow, they run a podcast, they must be the real deal. There's a psychological aspect to it. So there's that, and then they're really convenient for people to follow because they're so episodic. People can subscribe to you and therefore engage in your other content. And when you have returning viewers, that actually helps your brand to grow as well. 41% of the country listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. So if you are not doing podcasts, you're literally leaving money on the table. The best platforms that I found to use are StreamYard. That's the one that I use personally. That one does audio and video, and then you've got Zoom as well, also audio and video. The main difference between Zoom and StreamYard is StreamYard, you can broadcast to multiple destinations at once, say YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, all at the same time simultaneously. So it's really convenient in that sense, whereas Zoom, you can only broadcast to one destination at a time. Then you've got Buzzsprout, and that's just audio, and RSS as well. Those are some of the top ones. What I'd recommend is, if you are looking to set up your own podcast or even your own vodcast, then have a look at the different platforms, because you might find that some of the features on one platform will work better for you and what you want the outcome to be. There was supposed to be some text there. So I'm going to go back. Give me a second, guys, technical issues. Right, I'm going to share it this way instead so that it works. So as I mentioned before, there's lots of different ways to repurpose your, essentially to monetize your podcast. And ultimately, isn't that really the goal, to, when you're doing a podcast, to raise your brand awareness and ultimately to grow from it and make more money from it? So these are the different ways that I found are really, really useful in terms of repurposing your podcast. But firstly, I just want to go back and explain what's the difference between a podcast and a vodcast. A podcast is audio only. So as I mentioned before, some platforms will only allow for audio, and then you can download them on platforms like Spotify, Google Play Store, Apple Store, etc. Whereas a vodcast, it introduces video. Personally, I favor vodcasts because they introduce a new visual element to your content, and it can be repurposed a lot more easily and more effectively as well. So with doing podcasts, you kind of have the best of both. You can choose to just use the audio, and you can choose to also have the video as another option. So some of the ways that I found really useful to repurpose the content is to live stream the podcast. So as I mentioned before, some platforms will allow you to stream videos. Live stream the podcast, because that's one piece of content. For those of you who didn't know, live videos actually, statistically speaking, they get more reach than any other form of engagement, just purely because it's live. Therefore, the platform sees it as something engaging, something that people can engage with immediately. So it will push it out to more people. So definitely look at doing it as a live stream to begin with. Then you can extract it, turn it into either highlights as a video or highlights as an audio. You can even repurpose or reshare the entire thing as a recording as well. Again, another piece of content for you. You can transcribe the text or the audio, turn that audio into text quotes, blogs, articles. That will save you so many hours in a week. I mean, how many hours do you think you spend on average writing blog articles, writing social media posts? And what you could do instead is, from your podcast or your vodcast, you can extract the key points, and there's your content already there, ready to go for you. One of my favorite platforms to use for transcribing audio into text and even videos into text is otter.ai. Really, really powerful that is, because it will save you so much time in terms of transcribing. As I mentioned before, you can create regular posts on social media. When people see that your content is showing up consistently in their feed, not only can you plug your own content within the podcast, but it means that people remember you when they need your services, because you're at the forefront of their mind, because you've been posting consistently on your social media platforms. On that note as well, I see a lot of people post a link to the podcast. If you're going to do that, say you've got a new podcast episode, you decide to share it on LinkedIn, you share the link within the post itself. Sharing the link within the post itself can actually be more detrimental for your reach on social media. So what I would recommend is post the link to your podcast in the comment section. That will help from an algorithm point of view. But if you can, post natively to the platform. That means post directly your podcast to the platform, because from a social media perspective, they want to keep people on their platform. So if it sees that your post is going to send somebody somewhere else, it's going to reduce the reach of your particular post, which is obviously what you don't want. So as I mentioned before, it gives your audience different ways to engage within your content. Again, plug in your brand, plug in your business, plug in your services, your products within your podcast itself without it being salesy. It's a subtle way to remind people that you're there. It's a subtle way to remind people of what you're about. That way, when they're ready to choose your services or your product, you're at the forefront of their mind, and it's not done in a salesy kind of way. You can also use your podcast within newsletters. I know some of my guests, they've used the interview that we've done, shared it within their newsletter, either as a text or a video. And then you can also convert it into infographics as well. So infographics is basically a much more detailed version of a graphic that explains something. And then, so some of you may be thinking, I really like the idea of being on video. I really love the idea of doing a podcast, but I just don't want to put myself out there. And I get it. It feels scary. It feels vulnerable because you're putting yourself out there, potentially for the trolls to come and get you. So first of all, I would say I've been there, I've done that, so I know exactly how it feels, which is why I'm sharing these tips from a place of personal experience. So my first tip is to really have fun with what you're doing. Find the joy in it, because that energy will come across within you and it will come across to your audience as well. If you're having a guest on your show, have fun with them, make it conversational, have a bit of banter with them, have a bit of a laugh with them. Same goes for the audience as well. Just be 100% your authentic self, because ultimately that's what people are going to buy into. Another tip that I found really, really useful is speaking to yourself out loud off camera beforehand. Now there's, well, quick show of hands actually, who hates the sound of their own voice and seeing themselves on camera? Yeah, most people, right? So There's actually a scientific reason for that. So we sound differently to other people than what we think we sound like to ourselves. The reason for that is when we hear our own voice, we're hearing it from our jawline here, because that's where the audio is coming out from our throat to us. However, as sound travels out of our mouth, sound waves manipulate how we sound to other people. So when we hear ourselves back on recordings, we think, oh gosh, do I really sound like that? Oh, no, I don't like that. That's why we think we sound different. That's why we think we sound horrible, because we're actually not used to how we sound to other people. And then from a visual perspective, we get used to seeing ourselves day in, day out. So to us, the symmetricalness, if that's a word, of our face, eventually that becomes like faded to us. We tend to ignore the parts of our face that aren't similar. Now, when we see ourselves on a recording, we don't see that. We see all the dissimilarities. We see everything as it actually is, which again, we're not used to. So that's why visually we don't like looking at ourselves typically on camera. So I hope that, guys, gives you a bit of confidence about, why we don't like the look and sound of ourselves, and to know that actually you're not alone. One of the ways that I've found really, really useful in terms of helping my own confidence is coming from a place of value, because if we show up and think, well, what's in it for me and how do I look and how am I coming across, that's putting the pressure on ourselves, because we think we have to do something to perform, to make something work, when actually we're good enough as we are. So when we come from a place of how can I serve, how can I add value to the viewer, it takes that pressure away from us. And every time I caught myself being a bit self-aware of how I sound or what I'm saying, etc., I thought, actually, I switched that thinking to what value am I giving to the audience? And it immediately it creates a mindset shift in your own mind. One of the ways that you can really put that into practice is to ask your audience questions there and then. Again, if you're doing this live, really, really powerful for generating engagement and driving the reach for your particular podcast. Ask them questions about what they want to know. You can either ask them live on the show, or you can ask them beforehand. And also ask them for engagement as well. Don't be afraid to ask people to like and comment and share their opinions on things as well. People are going to be like sitting ducks unless you tell them what to do. I know that sounds kind of obvious, and it sounds a bit like a bit cheesy to say like, comment and share and whatever, but people do it if you actually ask them to do it. Look at the lens as well and not yourself. Now, as beautiful as we all are, we all have a temptation when we're recording to look at ourselves, because again, it's that self-awareness feeling that we create within ourselves. But when you look at the lens, it's like you're looking at somebody directly in their face when you're talking with them face to face. I mean, if you think about it, when you're communicating with somebody face to face, you would look at them straight in their eye, wouldn't you? It's the exact same principle when it comes to doing broadcasts. Look directly at the lens, and that actually can help the audience feel much more comfortable with watching you. It's a subconscious psychological effect. When people don't look directly at the lens, that actually can make the audience feel a little bit less easy. As I mentioned before as well, make the whole podcast conversational. If you script every single bit of it, or even a large portion of your podcast, it's going to come across that way. I would always recommend to people, don't use scripts. Have a bullet point or a structure of what you want to go through within the podcast or the podcast, but feel free to kind of wing it if you like. Have a conversation, because that's natural. What isn't natural is having a question, a fire and answer round. So yeah, I hope that helps you guys. And if you have any questions, or if you want more confidence tips, then do let me know. So monetizing your podcasts, the stuff that everybody wants to know about. So there's lots of different ways to monetize your podcasts, and all of them work really, really powerfully. It's just about finding the method that works for you. So option one, you can have guests to pay to appear on your podcast. That has more credibility if you're getting lots of views and a high retention rate. I'd recommend at least having 500 plus viewers per podcast if you're going to ask the guest to pay to appear, because otherwise they may be thinking, why am I paying for PR when I can just get that myself? So that's one option. The other option is sponsorships, actually reaching out to relevant brands and asking them to sponsor your podcast or your vodcast for a small nominal fee. And in return, you advertise them on your show. Some of the biggest podcasts that I know out there do this for every single episode. This next tip is to help the guest actually. And when you create your podcast, if you can partner up with somebody like a video editor or an audio editor, that can actually be really powerful for you and the guest, because you can then upsell the services of asking your guests if they would like highlights of their content. This is really, really powerful, I found, because podcasts typically tend to be 10 minutes, an hour long. Realistically, nobody's going to spend long amounts of time rewatching content, but they might tune into bite-sized pieces of content. So when you ask your guests if they would like highlights of their content for them to repurpose, one, you can get them into your sales funnel that way, and two, it's easy money for you. The next option is to set up relevant affiliates. For those of you who don't know what affiliate schemes are, it's essentially where you advertise something on your behalf. Every time somebody buys from that particular link that you share, you get a kickback off that. If you're a brand that has products, i.e. merchandise, you can sell custom merchandise to fans. What I mean, keyword there being custom, because you got to make it bespoke. You got to make it something more exclusive that they're going to get as a result of paying for it. Tiered memberships as well. This kind of goes into the tip that I mentioned before about getting people into your sales funnel. So if you have different package options for your podcasts, then you can essentially upsell that. So you can have a free version, i.e. appear on my show for 10 minutes. 20 quid, you get a half an hour. 100 quid, you get a full hour. So different tiered membership options. And obviously you got to work out individual packages to make it juicy for each package. And then the last one, the obvious one, upsell your services to not only the viewers, but also to the guests as well. So that's pretty much how to run podcasts and monetize them in a nutshell. So as I mentioned before, I run my own show, Live Wire TV. We broadcast live across LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube every Thursday, 7 p.m. GMT time. So if you are a business owner who's got a really compelling business strategy, marketing strategy, or really an inspiring story, I'd love to hear from you and get you some exposure. So yeah, any questions for me?
Brilliant. Thank you, Rohini. Who's got some questions then? Certainly lots of comment in the chat. So I think you've definitely engaged everyone. So Kaylee's hand is up. So go for it, Kaylee.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask like a technical question. So I set up a StreamYard account months ago because I've been talking or threatening, whichever way you want to look at it, to do little short sort of 2-3 minute bits of videos sharing advice and tips and tricks and things around branding, design, websites, etc. And I got StreamYard and I looked at it and I kind of went, oh, I don't know what I'm doing with it. And also when I looked at it, I don't think you could stream live to everything. You had to like do it and then you had to share it. You had to like download it and then share it. I think it was to Instagram, for example, you couldn't go live to. But you mentioned StreamYard earlier on. So does that now just live stream to basically every platform? So I wouldn't need to download it and then reshare it?
No, you shouldn't have to do that now.
Okay, so it'll go to what, LinkedIn? We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram.
Yeah, so some platforms you need to actually register to go live, like LinkedIn, you have to actually apply to go live.
I did that.
So just be mindful of that.
Yeah, okay, cool. And then in regards to format wise, because obviously LinkedIn, I think LinkedIn, whenever I've seen them, they're generally portrait, but Instagram are vertical. So have you got any tips around like how to set yourself up to make sure that the one video works on all of the different platforms? Just make sure you're in the center, basically.
Yeah, make sure you're in the center, but also some platforms like Instagram, they're going to crop it because that's their format essentially. So it's how you position yourself on camera. So personally, I will sit quite far back. So when I do repurpose the content, then it's not going to look odd on Instagram.
You're not going to be like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, yeah, thank you, Rohini. Thank you.
No problem.
Excellent. Right, has anyone else got any questions for Rohini? Oh, all hands going up all over the place. I've got Sam and Jane. I think Sam slightly beat you to the punch there, Jane. So go for it, Sam.
Hi, this is something I'm really wanting to do, but I'm a complete technical numpty, and I gained a lot of advice, very interested in StreamYard. My question is this. In my haberdashery business, a lot of the focus is on education, teaching people skills, and I'm looking at doing things like, I don't know if you've heard of knit-alongs, crochet-alongs, which some of the big crafting companies do in order to get to buy a kit, and basically you log on at a certain time and do that. My question is this really, what are the advantages of doing the vodcasting as opposed to setting up a YouTube channel and just putting my content on that? Is there pros and cons for each one, or would you, from what you're saying about the vodcasting, I think that could potentially be a better fit for what I'm wanting to do, but I am finding it easier to do a YouTube channel. What are your thoughts?
So there's different responses to that, so I'll go through all of them. Number one, make sure that your audience actually use YouTube regularly. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, well, I've got a video, therefore it needs to be on YouTube. That's actually not the case. Like, I don't focus on, which is going to sound ironic, I run a video marketing agency, and yet I don't focus on YouTube because I know that my audience don't use YouTube. My ideal clients, they haven't got time to be spending on YouTube. So first tip is do your research to really figure out, actually, is this where my audience are hanging out? Because if they're not, you're going to be wasting your time. That's
pretty much what I'm thinking, because, you know, atypically, having, you know, done my research, I'm, you know, it's people like me, middle-aged women, not particularly techie. You know, I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible for them to access my stuff. So I think I've just pretty much answered my own question then, you know, and YouTube probably isn't the way forward. Yeah, so maybe look at platforms that will stream to multiple locations at once then, like StreamYard. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rohini. Right, Jane, go for it. You had a question.
Yeah, it was just following on from one of the slides, and it said that 41% of the country listen to podcasts on a monthly basis. What country is that based on?
UK.
Oh, that's the UK?
Yeah.
Wow. That's really good, isn't it?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rohini. Anyone else got any questions? Yeah, Tom, go for it.
Thanks for that, Rohini. It's really, really helpful. I was going to ask you, do you have any advice on mics and lighting?
Yeah, so depending on how you want to set up your podcast, you can either have literally just type into Google podcast microphones and then a bunch of them will come up. That's the simple answer, because I'm not going to go into the technical details of it. If you're somebody that likes to do things like on the go, like I do quite a lot of videos on the go, and you can do vodcasts on the go as well, you can get yourself what's called a lavalier microphone. I'll pop that in the chat for you guys so you can make a note of it. So I put a lavalier microphone with 3 lines, and what I mean by 3 lines is there's different types of lavalier microphones. So the one that's going to work with your phone is the one that has 3 lines, 3 clear black lines by the jack. The jack is the part that goes into your phone. So you literally just clip it there and it will make the audio much more crisp and blank out any background noise. In terms of the lighting, I personally use a softbox light. Some people also use a ring light as well. The bigger the ring light, the better.
You said a ring? Did you say a ring light?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, ring lights tend to appear in like all sizes. So you get the small ones, which are probably more ideal for your phone, but they're not very powerful. But then the bigger ones are very powerful.
Everyone's showing off their lighting now. I'm not unclipping mine. My camera's attached to it. It'll all fall down. Excellent.
There's some questions that have come in on the chat as well. So Shabari, I know that with podcasts, it can be shared on Spotify, iTunes, etc. If you prefer to do a podcast instead, are there any platforms it can be shared to where they're bigger reach from your social media page, or apart from social media pages? You can also host it on your website as well. So what I'd recommend is, if you are going to host something like a podcast or a vodcast outside of social media, make sure that you've got your landing page and everything else set up alongside of it as well.
I mean, presumably you could also extract the audio component of the vodcast and put that onto the other platforms that Shabari mentions as well. So you could get kind of two for the price of one.
Exactly.
Thanks for that, Rohini. I was just wondering, with visual podcasts, vodcasts, are there any platforms similar to Spotify or SoundCloud or whatever, where you can go up in, if more people watch it, it goes up in the it's like a chart, because Spotify have a chart, iTunes have a chart, and where you can in your category it can actually rise in numbers. Are there any similar platforms to Spotify or iTunes that would allow you to have your vodcast available, and then people can download or vote or whatever?
The only other option that I'm aware of is social media.
What about Twitch, Rohini? Because I know it started as mostly gaming, but it's much more general purpose video content now. Is that something worth exploring?
Twitch is very similar to YouTube. So for those of you who don't know Twitch, it's another streaming platform, a bit like YouTube, but it's a lot more niche in terms of beauty industries and tech industries and also gaming industries. Again, like YouTube, it's a very tough thing to crack. So unless you've got a decent budget and a lot of time on your hands, it's probably not worth looking at. But also you've got to consider whether or not your audience is familiar with Twitch, or if they're willing to get familiar with Twitch.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, cool. Any further questions for Rohini? We've got a couple of minutes left. No? No more hands. Okay, all right. Well, I shall stop the recording. Thank you very much for that, Rohini. I think it's fair to say there was a lot of interest in that, judging by the number of questions both during the presentation and afterwards. So thank you very much.